A clunk you can feel through the floor. A steering wheel that never quite settles on center. Tires that start to look feathered even though you swear you haven't hit anything. Those are the moments when people start googling control arm bushings, because the car still drives, but it doesn't feel tight anymore. And the tricky part is that a worn bushing can imitate half the front end, sway bar links, strut mounts, even a loose splash shield can sound similar. So if you're here for front control arm bushing replacement on Toyota Corolla Cross, the real win isn't just swapping parts. It's making sure you're fixing the right thing, and then installing it in a way that doesn't destroy the new bushing in a few weeks. Let's start with what a front control arm bushing actually does, because that explains why the cheap approach can become the expensive one. The control arm is the link that locates the wheel in space. The ball joint at the outer end lets the knuckle pivot for steering and suspension travel. The inner end is mounted to the subframe through bushings, and those bushings are not just rubber donuts. They're engineered to flex in specific directions, resist movement in others, and absorb vibration without letting the wheel wander. When they're healthy, the wheel stays where it should under braking, acceleration, and bumps. When they're torn or separated, the wheel can shift fore and aft or side to side just enough to create noise, instability, and weird tire wear. Symptoms matter, because they point to which bushing is failing and whether it's even the bushing at all. A dull clunk over small bumps at low speed can be a bushing, but it's also classic sway bar link territory. A single knock when you go from reverse to drive, or when you step the brakes, often points to fore-aft movement in the control arm, bushing compliance that's gone too far. Wandering on the highway, where you're constantly making tiny corrections, can be bushings, but it can also be alignment, tire pressure, or a tire with a broken belt. A vibration under braking is more often rotors, but if the wheel is shifting under load, bushings can contribute to that shimmy feeling. The point is, don't marry the diagnosis before you've checked. Here are a few quick checks that don't require a lift. First, look at your tires. If one front tire is wearing differently than the other, or you see inside edge wear that's getting worse fast, something is moving. Next, with the car parked, have someone rock the steering wheel left and right a small amount while you watch the front wheels and listen. A bushing clunk is usually more of a thud from low in the chassis, not a click at the tie rod. Then do the simple braking test in a safe area, roll slowly and apply the brakes firmly. If you feel a knock right as the brakes bite, that's the suspension loading up. Not proof, but a clue. Now the more telling check, wheel off the ground, safely supported. This is where people get hurt, so take it seriously. Use a proper jack point and jack stands on solid ground. Once the wheel is off, look at the control arm bushings with a light. You're looking for obvious cracks, torn rubber, or rubber that has separated from the metal sleeve. Some surface cracking can be normal with age, but deep splits, missing chunks, or a bushing that looks wet from leaking fluid on designs that are hydraulic are red flags. Then the pry bar test. You're not trying to bend anything, you're trying to see if the arm moves too easily relative to the subframe. Place a pry bar carefully between the control arm and the subframe and apply gentle leverage. A healthy bushing will flex, but it won't let the arm jump around or shift with a sharp clunk. If you can see the inner sleeve moving independently, or the rubber tearing as you load it, that's a strong indicator. While you're there, check the sway bar link by grabbing it and trying to move it. If it clicks or feels loose, that can be your noise. Also inspect the ball joint boot. If the boot is torn or leaking grease, that's a separate problem, and it changes your plan. And here's the first, don't ignore this, moment. If you see the control arm bushing completely separated, or the ball joint boot torn with play in the joint, don't keep driving like nothing's happening. A bushing failure can let the wheel shift enough to affect braking instability. A ball joint failure can be far worse. If you're unsure, get it inspected by a professional. There's no pride in guessing on a safety-critical part. Assuming you've confirmed the bushings are the likely culprit, you hit the big decision, replace just the bushing, or replace the entire control arm assembly. This is where people get trapped by the word replacement, because it sounds like the bushing is a simple service item. Sometimes it is. But on many modern cars, the control arm is designed to be replaced as an assembly because it saves labor time at the dealership and reduces the chance of a bad press job. That doesn't mean you can't do bushings. It means you need to be honest about tools, risk, and what you're trying to achieve. Bushing-only replacement can make sense if the control arm itself is in great shape, the ball joint is good, and you have access to a press or a proper bushing toolkit. It can also make sense if you're using high-quality bushings and you're comfortable matching the exact orientation. The upside is cost savings on parts and the satisfaction of doing it the right way. The downside is time, the possibility of damaging the control arm during pressing, and the possibility of installing the bushing clocked wrong, which can create noise, binding, or premature failure. Replacing the whole control arm is often the smarter move if the ball joint is integrated and not serviceable separately, or if the arm is corroded, bent, or the bushings are hydraulic and difficult to press without special supports. It's also the safer choice for many DIYers because it reduces the number of ways you can mess up. You unbolt the old arm, bolt in the new one, and you're done, mostly. You still have to torque correctly and get an alignment, but you avoid the press work. There's also a hidden cost that people forget, downtime. If you start a bushing-only job on a Saturday and discover the bushing won't press out, or the arm deforms, or you can't source the correct bushing locally, your Corolla Cross is stuck on stands. With a complete arm, you can usually finish in one session if nothing is seized. Let's talk parts quality without turning it into a brand debate. OEM parts tend to match the original ride and durability. Aftermarket can be fine, but the risk is inconsistent rubber quality and incorrect void patterns in the bushing. Those voids, the gaps and shapes in the rubber, are not random. They control how the bushing flexes. If the aftermarket bushing looks similar but not identical, it may change how the car feels, or it may fail early. If you're going bushing only, make sure the bushing is truly correct for your exact application. If you're going full arm, make sure the arm includes the correct bushings and ball joint configuration. Tooling is the next reality check. At minimum you'll want a solid floor jack stands, wheel chocks, a breaker bar, a torque wrench, and basic sockets and wrenches. You'll likely need a way to separate the ball joint from the knuckle. Some people use a pickle fork, but that can destroy boots and isn't ideal if you're trying to preserve parts. A proper ball joint separator tool is cleaner. You may need penetrating oil and a wire brush for threads. And if you're pressing bushings, you need either hydraulic press with the right adapters or a bushing press kit that can be used on the car or on the bench. The key is support. Pressing without supporting the arm correctly is how you bend it. Before you touch a bolt, set yourself up to avoid the most common mistake, losing orientation. Many control arm bushings are directional. They have voids, arrows, flats, or marks that must be aligned a certain way relative to the arm. If you press the old bushing out and then realize you didn't note how it was clocked, you're guessing. So clean the area and take clear photos. Mark the arm and the bushing with paint or a punch mark so you can replicate the position. If the new bushing comes with alignment marks, follow the manufacturer's instructions. If you're unsure, compare the new bushing to the old one before removal and match the orientation. Now we move into the hands-on workflow for front control arm bushing replacement on Toyota Corolla Cross, and I want you to keep one idea in your head the whole time: the suspension is happiest when it's supported. The knuckle, the CV axle, the brake hose, the ABS wire, none of those should be hanging by accident while you wrestle with bolts. Start with the car on level ground. Loosen the lug nut slightly before lifting. Chock the rear wheels. Lift the front and place it securely on jack stands. Remove the wheel. If there are underbody panels or splash shields blocking access to the control arm bolts, remove them carefully and keep track of fasteners. Next, look at the sway bar link. Depending on layout, it may connect to the strut or the control arm. If it's in your way, disconnect it. If the stud spins, you may need to hold it with an Allen key or a wrench on the flats, depending on design. Don't round it off. If it's rusty, take your time. Now support the knuckle. A small jack under the lower control arm near the ball joint area, or under the knuckle itself with a block of wood, can keep things from dropping suddenly when you separate the joint. You're not lifting the car with this jack, you're just supporting the assembly. Separating the ball joint from the knuckle is where people get aggressive and cause damage. The ball joint stud sits in a tapered seat. That taper can be stubborn. If there's a pinch bolt style clamp, remove the pinch bolt and spread the knuckle slightly with the correct tool if needed, gently. If it's a castle nut style, you remove the nut and use a separator tool to pop the taper loose. Avoid hammering directly on the stud threads. If you must use a hammer, the classic technique is to strike the side of the knuckle at the taper boss to shock it loose, not to smash the joint itself. But be careful, you can crack components if you go wild. Slow force with the right tool beats brute force. Once the ball joint is free, you can move the knuckle outwards slightly. Watch the brake hose and ABS wire. Don't stretch them. If you need more slack, unclip the wire from its brackets rather than pulling on it. Now locate the control arm mounting bolts at the subframe. There may be two inner mounts, a front bushing and a rear bushing, depending on design. Some bolts may be long and pass through sleeves. If your vehicle uses chem bolts for alignment, mark their position relative to the subframe before loosening. A paint marker line can help you get close on reassembly, though you still need an alignment afterward. If bolts are seized, don't just lean harder until something snaps. Use penetrating oil, work the bolt back and forth, and be prepared for the possibility that a seized bolt turns a DIY job into a shop job. With the inner bolts removed and the ball joint separated, the control arm comes out. Compare it to your replacement part if you're swapping the whole arm. If you're doing bushings only, this is where you decide whether to press on the bench. Bench pressing is usually safer and more controlled than trying to press bushings in the car. Pressing out the old bushing is all about support and alignment. The control arm must be supported close to the bushing housing so the force goes through the bushing, not through a thin section of the arm. Use press plates or appropriately sized sleeves. If you press on the wrong surface, you can oval the bushing bore or crack the arm. Apply force slowly and make sure the bushing is moving straight. If it cocks sideways, stop and reset. Sometimes bushings are bonded and stubborn. It is sometimes used in professional settings, but for a DIY it can be risky around rubber and coatings. If you're not confident, this is the moment to take the arm and new bushings to a machine shop. Paying for a clean press job can be cheaper than replacing a ruined control arm. Before pressing the new bushing in, clean the bore. Remove corrosion and rubber residue carefully. Don't gouge the metal. Light lubrication may be recommended depending on bushing type, or follow the bushing manufacturer's guidance. Some bushings are designed to be pressed dry. Others may allow a thin film of soapy water or specific lubricant to ease installation. Grease in the wrong place can allow the bushing to slip or squeak later. Now the most important part, clocking in depth. The bushing must go in at the correct angle and to the correct seating depth. Many bushings have a shoulder that seats against the arm. Others must be centered. If you press it too far, you can distort it. If you don't press it far enough, it can walk out. Use the old bushing as a reference for depth if it was original and properly seated. And match the orientation marks you made earlier. This is not a close enough step. A bushing with voids installed rotated can change how it flexes under braking and can create a pull or a clunk. Once the bushings are installed, reinstall the control arm. Start all bolts by hand. Don't fully tighten anything yet. Reconnect the ball joint to the knuckle carefully, making sure the taper seat is clean and fully seated. If it's a pinch clamp style, ensure the stud is fully inserted to the correct depth before tightening the pinch bolt. If it's a nut on a stud, thread it on smoothly and torque it to the factory specification. If the stud spins, you may need to apply upward pressure with a jack to seat the taper while tightening. Now here's the mistake that kills new bushings, tightening the inner control arm bushing bolts while the suspension is hanging. Those bushings are designed to sit at a neutral position at normal ride height. If you torque them with the wheel dangling, the bushing is twisted at rest. Then every bump twists it further in the same direction. That constant preload tears rubber and causes early failure, sometimes with brand new parts. It can also create a ride height change or a weird, springy feel. So you need to torque at ride height. There are a few safe ways to do that. One is to put the wheel back on, lower the car onto ramps, and then torque the bolts with the vehicle's weight on the suspension. Another is to keep the car on stands but use a jack under the knuckle or control arm to raise the suspension until it's at approximate ride height, then torque. The goal is the same, the control arm should be in its normal position when the bushing bolts are finally tightened to spec. Use the factory service manual for the exact torque values and any angle tightening requirements. If the manual specifies replacing certain bolts or nuts, take that seriously. Some fasteners are designed as one-time use. After everything is torqued correctly, reinstall any underbody panels, double-check that the brake hose and ABS wire are routed and clipped properly, and reinstall the wheel. Torque the lug nuts to spec with the car on the ground. Now, alignment. People love to skip alignment because the steering wheel looks straight. But control arm bushings and control arm position directly affect caster and toe, and even small changes can chew tires and make the car feel nervous. If you replace the whole arm, or if you disturb chem bolts, plan on getting a professional alignment. Even if you marked everything, marks get you close, not correct. Your first test drive should be boring. Slow speed, gentle braking, a few turns, then a slightly rough road. Listen for new noises. A fresh bushing can feel tighter immediately, less delay when you turn, less thump over bumps. If you still have a clunk, don't assume the new bushing didn't work. Recheck sway bar links, strut mounts, loose caliper hardware, and engine or transmission mounts. Also recheck that all fasteners are torqued and that the ball joint is fully seated. A persistent clunk under braking can also be a loose subframe bolt or worn bushing on the other side. Suspension problems love to come in pairs. If the steering feels off-center or the car pulls, don't try to live with it. That's what alignment is for. And if you notice a squeak after bushing work, it can be an installation issue, contamination, or a bushing type that needs specific lubrication in specific places. Again, follow the bushing manufacturer's guidance and the service manual. Now let's return to the question that makes this job more complicated than it looks: is bushing only actually the smart choice? Sometimes yes. If you have the tools, the patience, and you're careful about orientation and ride height torque, bushing only can restore the original feel and save money. But if you're improvising with a hammer, guessing the clocking, or tightening everything while it hangs, you can end up with a car that still clunks and bushings that fail early. In that case, the cheap repair becomes a repeat repair. For many owners, a complete control arm replacement is the most predictable path: fewer specialized steps, fewer ways to misinstall, and you often get a fresh ball joint at the same time. The trade-off is higher parts cost and the need to ensure you're buying a quality assembly. Either way, the two non-negotiables are the same. First, confirm the diagnosis so you're not chasing noise. Second, torque the bushing bolts at ride height and get an alignment afterward. If you remember nothing else from front control arm bushing replacement on Toyota Corolla Cross, remember that. The bushing doesn't fail because it's weak. It fails because it's forced to live its whole life twisted. If you approach the job with that mindset, support the suspension, protect the boots and wiring, press with control, match orientation, and torque at ride height, you end up with a Corolla Cross that feels calm again. No mystery clunks. No wandering. Just the quiet, solid front end you're supposed to have.